Alright then gang, so if we take a look at this app.js file at the minute, it's getting quite long. There's a lot of code in it, and before long it might start to look a bit messy and hard to maintain and update. So what we're going to do now is explore a couple of things, the Express router and also MVC, which we'll talk about later, just to neaten this up and maybe split our code into different files. So first of all, the Express router. So the Express router is something that comes fully baked into Express, and we can use it to manage all of our routes more efficiently and more tidily as well, especially as the size of your project grows and grows and you've got many different routes. So we use the Express router to split our routes into different files and manage them in small groups of routes that belong together, and it makes the app more modular, and it also becomes easier to update those different parts of the app later on, and it will mean that we don't have to have everything just defined in one big messy file. So if we take a look at all of our routes from the top, a lot of them have this in it: /blogs, /blogs, blogs. So these are all the blog routes, right? So we could split them into their own route file because they're all concerned with one type of resource and they kind of belong together. So let's create a new folder to do this. Over here, I'm going to say this folder will be called routes, and inside I'm going to create a new file called blog routes because this will contain all of the blog routes. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is grab all of the blog routes. So from here, I'm going to cut all of these from this file. So this file is already looking a bit tidier because we don't have those. And I'm going to save this and paste them in right here. So now all of those routes are in this file. Now, obviously, at the minute, this is not going to work because we're trying to attach all of these route handlers to this app instance which we have, but this app instance isn't defined and set up in this file. It's way over here in app.js. So instead what we're going to do is a couple of things. First of all, we're going to require express. So let me say const express is equal to a require, and we want to require the express package. The next thing I'm going to do is create a new express router. So I'm going to say const router, and you can call that constant whatever you want, and I'm going to set that equal to express.router with a capital R, and that creates us a new instance of a router object. So what we can do now is we can attach these request handlers to the router instead of the app. So let's replace all of the times we say app right here. Let me just go down and select all these. I'm just holding down Alt, by the way, when I double click to select them all. I'm going to delete that and replace each one with the router. So what we're doing is creating an instance of this router, which is like a mini app. It's like the app, but standing alone, it doesn't do anything. We have to use the router inside an app. So we're creating this instance of the router. We're attaching these handlers to the router, and then at the bottom, I'm going to export this router. So to do that, I say module.export and set that equal to the router. Okay, does that make sense? So we're exporting this now, this kind of mini app with all of these different route handlers. Now what we can do is we can import this inside app.js, and we can use that inside our app. So let me go to the top, and now let me say over here, we want to say const blog routes is equal to require, and we want to go into the routes folder, then we want the blog routes file. Okay, now also, before we go on, this thing right here, we don't need that in this file anymore because we're not interacting with the blog model in this file directly. So let's cut that from there and instead paste it over here where we are using it, up here at the top, because we're using it in these route handlers. So let me save this and come back over here. Now we're importing these blog routes. How do we use them inside our Express app? Well, all we need to do is come down to here where we had the blog routes defined, and we can say app.use as we would use a bit of middleware. And all we're going to do is use the blog routes like so. That's all we need to do. And this is going to say, okay, well, I'm going to look at these, which are over here, and I'm going to apply all of these handlers to the app. that's what it does. Okay, so if I save this now, everything should still work the same way. Let me try this out. I'm going to refresh and we should still get this page with all of the blogs, but we don't. So there seems to be some kind of error. Let me open up the terminal and we see right here, module not found. Let me scroll up and see what's going on. Okay, I think it's because up here we're requiring inside blog routes the models, but we need to come out of the routes folder first of all. So let me double dot, that means come out of the current folder, then go into models, which is right here, then I want the blog file. So save that. Hopefully this should work now. Let me first of all go to the home page. Let's see if this works. Yep, it does. And if we go to Yoshi's Party, this should work. Yes, it does. All right, so these are all working the same way. Let's try adding a new blog. And this is just kind of hanging. So let me see what's going on. Let me just go to the blog routes and see here. Right, the problem is we have this URL handle right here. So /blogs/create, but we also have this one at the top right here, get /blogs/id, right? Now, when we go to /blogs/create, who's to say that that create part shouldn't be an ID? Because remember, the code runs from top to bottom. So what I actually need to do is grab this and I need to paste it above this one right here. So when the request comes in for /blogs/create, this one fires first and not this one, because if this one fires first, then we're going to try and find a blog with the ID of create, and that's not going to work. So that's the reason that's not working. Let me save that and let me go back and try this again. So new blog, and hopefully this should work now, and it does. Okay, so let me add this new blog, submit it and see if this works, and voila, so everything now still works. So then, that is the Express router. It allows us to extract the routes into a different file, create kind of like a mini app, and then use those routes in our app when we use app.use blog routes. Now, if we wanted to, we could go one step further and we could scope this to a specific URL. So I could say that I want to scope this to, for example, /blogs. Now, what is this going to do? Well, it means it's only going to apply these blog routes when we go to /blogs. But check this out. If I go to /blogs now, then it's going to hang and it's not going to work. But if I go to /blogs/blogs, then we should get the home page. So what's going on? Well, if we go to our blog routes, we can see we have /blogs here and also /blogs right here. So basically we're saying only use these blog routes when the URL begins with /blogs. But then on top of that, we're saying, well, after that should come /blogs. So if we're scoping it out right here, we no longer need where we say blogs right here. And we can just have /, because then that would mean we've already gone to /blogs and we're just adding on the / at the end of it, which is the same thing, right? So we can take away the blogs bit from each one of these if we wanted to, like this. And because we scoped it out to /blogs, it's going to automatically apply that to the start of each one of these handlers. So now we're scoping it out right here and we don't have to add that to each one of these handlers. And that makes this a little bit more reusable, because if we change the URL structure in the future, we don't have to change everything right here. All we're doing is changing it right here where we scope the routes out. So if I save this now, everything should still work the same way. Let me just test this. If we click on this, it should go to the home page. Yep, it does. And if we go to About, we get the About thing. That's got nothing to do with blogs, so that doesn't really matter. If we go to New Blog, then we still get this. If we try to add a new one, it should still work. Awesome. So this is all working. So now we've done that, let's try and split up our code a little bit more by taking an MVC approach. So a lot of the time you'll hear developers say they want to take like an MVC approach. Now, what does that even mean? Well, MVC stands for Model View Controller, and it's a method of structuring our code and our files, and it aims to make our code more modular, reusable, and easier to maintain. It's not essential you use the methodologies of MVC, but it can be helpful, especially as your projects get larger. So we've already seen the M and the V, models and views. So views are where we make our HTML templates that a user will see, and models are how we describe our data structure and we use them to interact with the database. So the last piece of the puzzle is controllers. Now, controllers will be the thing that forms the link between our models and our views. They're like the middlemen that use models to get data and then pass that data into a view. Now, we've actually already done that directly in our route handlers, right? But the idea of using controllers is that we just extract those handler functions into a separate controller file. Then we can just reference those controller functions in our routes file. Again, though, you don't have to do this. The idea behind this is just to make our code easier to manage and to understand. We're just splitting our code into different areas or files, and then each area or file has its own job to do. So our route file matches incoming requests and it passes those requests to the correct controller function. A controller communicates with the appropriate model to get data into a view, and then the view then renders that data into its template and it gets sent to the browser. So all we're basically going to do is extract our route handler functions into a separate controller file to make everything a little easier to read and understand. So then, remember, the aim of all this is to make our code cleaner and neater. So what we're going to do is extract all of these different handler functions from the routes, and we're going to place those into a separate controller file. And then we can just reference those controller functions from this routes file. So what I'm going to do first of all is create a new folder called controllers. And now notice we have models, views and controllers, MVC, right? And inside here, I'm going to create a new file called blog controller.js. So all of our functions for this resource, blogs, so all of these functions that we use in these routes, they're going to live inside this blog controller file. Now then, what I'm going to do is create functions using a similar kind of naming convention as MDN. So that looks something like this. I'm going to create a function called blog index to get all the blogs and inject those into the index view. I'm going to use blog details for the name of the function for this one to get a single blog, which is this right here. I'm going to use blog create get to send back the actual form. So this is a get request. Blog create post to add a new blog, and then blog delete to delete a blog. So that's the naming convention I'm going to use for these controller functions. So the first thing I want to do is create these functions. So let me do that. Const blog underscore index, and that is going to be equal to a function. Oops, let's spell this correctly. I can never do that for some reason. Index. This is equal to a function. And inside the function, we want to do all of this logic right here, right? Not that one. We want all of this one right here. So let's cut it from there and let's paste it in here. Now then, first of all, we can take in the request and the response object, because remember, in these functions, we get access to that request and response. So I'm going to say request and response. And then we also need to import the blog model. So let me grab that from here, because we're not going to need that anymore in this file, because all of the logic is not going to be in here anymore. It's going to be in this one instead. So let me paste this at the top so we have it right there. So now if I say at the bottom module.exports is equal to an object, and inside this object we're going to output the blog index as a property, right? So now we have access to that from anywhere we import this file. So let me just save this for a second, and we're going to import it over here. So I'm going to say const and then blog controller is equal to a require, and we want to require dot forward slash to come out of the current folder, which is the routes, then go into the controllers folder, and then we want the blog controller, right? So now we have access to this, and we can access this function on it, blog index. So now instead of this function firing right here, we can just say blog controller dot blog index. So now all it's going to do is get this function right here, and it's going to place it right here. So it's doing exactly the same thing. It's just that now we've extracted it from here and we've placed it in a controller file. And we're going to do that now for every single function down here. So now let's do the next one, which is blog details. So let's create that function. So const blog underscore details, and that's equal to a function. We're taking the request and the response object, and in here we just want to paste all of the details. So that's this thing right here. So let's cut that from there and let's paste it right here instead. And then I want to export that as well. So blog underscore details, like so. Okay, so that's that one done. Let's go and reference that over here as well. So I'll say here that this should be blog controller dot blog details. Okay. Now the next one over here is blog create get. So that's the one for sending back the actual form. So when we click on that, that's that request. So let's create this function down here, const blog underscore create underscore get. That's equal to a function. Request and response goes into that function, and inside let's go and grab this thing right here where we render the create page. So let's cut that from here and paste it inside here. I've noticed a spelling error, so let me fix that. So we need to export that function as well. So blog underscore create underscore get, and we can now use that over here instead of this function. So blog controller dot blog underscore create get. Okay, so two more to do. Let me go back and let's do the next one, which is blog create post. So in fact, let me just copy this so I'm not typing out the same thing over and over. Blog create post, and then inside here we'll delete that, and then we'll export blog create post, and we need to get all of the details from here where we send a post request, which is this thing right here. So let me grab that and paste it right here. Now we can reference this function over here instead of this. So blog controller dot, and it's blog create post. And finally, we need to do this one down here. So let me go back over here, and this function is called blog delete. So we'll say const blog delete is equal to a function, request and response goes into that, and then inside we want to get all of this logic right here, cut it from there and paste it right here, and then finally export that, which is blog underscore delete, like so. And then we can come back over here and we can say right here blog controller dot blog underscore delete, and that is it. Awesome. So now we've extracted all of our different handlers into a blog controller file right here. So we're keeping all of the controller logic separate from the routes, and that way our routes look a lot neater, and we're kind of modularizing our code a bit more so it's easier to read and easier to update in the future. So before we get too carried away, let's just make sure this all still works. Nothing should change. Everything should still work the same way because we've not changed the functionality of anything. So, yep, the homepage works. If I go to About, that should still work. If I go to New Blog, that should still work. Try to add this. Submit. That still works. If we go to a Details, that works. If we delete one, this should work, but it's not doing. So let's just go back and see what's going on over here. Okay, yeah, my mistake. This should be delete, not details. All right, so we just had the wrong controller method applied to that. So if we go back over here now and try to delete this, hopefully this should work. If we click on delete, yeah, it works, and then redirects us back to the home page. Awesome. So now our code is structured in a much more logical way, which is easier to maintain. And for every new type of resource and set of routes, you would follow this pattern. You'd have a route file for the routes, a model for the data, and a controller for the handlers, and then a folder for its views as well. Now, just speaking of views, I think I'd actually like to structure our views a little better too, since at some point we might have multiple different resources, right? You could have users, polls, comments, categories, as well as blogs. Therefore, you might need, for example, a create, a details, an index for each individual resource, right? Now, we couldn't create multiple of those in here because the names would clash. So what we could do is we could scope these by putting them in their own folder. So for example, I could create a new folder called blogs inside views, and then I could place the create in there, the details in there, and the index in there. They're all the views that relate to blogs, right? Then if I had a different resource in the future, I could create a folder for that and do the same index, details, and create in that. So what I'm going to do now, just quickly, is go to the blog controller, and I need to, wherever I'm rendering a view, update that because we've put it in a new folder, and now it should be blogs/create, so it knows to go into the blogs folder first of all. And where else do we do this? Blogs/details, and then blogs/index. And if we save that and come and refresh, everything should still work the same way. But it doesn't. We get an error. And that's because, remember, we're using partials inside these things right here. And now they're in a different location. So we need to go back to these three things here, and we need to add double dot to each one of these so it knows to come out of the blogs folder first of all, then into partials. So let's do that for each one of these. So that's the index. Let's do details and add a dot in front of that one, and I think it's the top one now, yep. And then finally, let's do create and do a dot here, and a dot here, and a dot here, save that. And now if we come over here and refresh, hopefully this works. Yep, everything now still works. Awesome. Okay then, my friends, so there we go. That is MVC. Not essential, but definitely helpful.